There's been some rapid developments over the last couple of weeks with the tadpoles, so we've got a lot to talk about in this episode. Not only have a lot of the tadpoles now got their back legs, so we need to adjust their food, but also at least one of them has got their front legs as well, which means in this episode I'm going to show you how to set up a terrarium ready for when the tadpoles need to leave the water as little frogs. And also, we've got some problems. In this tank in particular, there seems to be a fungal infection, so we need to have a look at that as well. And not only that, but we've got mosquito larvae in this tank as well, so we'll talk a bit about what to do with those. So welcome to Frog Watch, there's a lot to talk about. Let's start off with a quick update on the development of the tadpoles and the tanks that they're in. This tank is the first one I set up back in episode 1. The plants, as you can see, have grown very large and are even growing out at the top of the water. This tank is luscious and green. This tank is the second tank I set up a few weeks later than the first. For some reason, the plants just haven't grown as well. It looks rather pathetic. I'm not sure why this has occurred, as each tank has been in the same conditions. If we take a closer look at some of the plants in the second tank, you can see some white fluffy patches that look like some kind of mould. I've been advised that this could be due to poor water conditions, possibly caused by too much food waste or an imbalance in the water's pH levels or other nutrients. This is interesting as both tanks receive the same amount of food and water changes and cleaning. Plants in an aquarium can contribute a huge amount to keeping the water clean by removing harmful nutrients and using them for growth. With the second tank's plants not having grown well, this has left it vulnerable to mould. At least that's my theory. More experienced fish and aquatics keepers may have better ideas. The other interesting development in the second tank are these. There are hundreds of tiny mosquito larvae. I get this every year, usually in both tanks. There's nothing really to worry about, they won't do any harm to the tadpoles. In fact, the tadpoles are more likely to eat them. I've never actually witnessed this, however, so I'm not entirely sure that they do, but I don't see why they wouldn't. The only thing that's not great about it is that the house will be infested with mosquitoes for the next few weeks. Not fun, so I may try to get rid of them before they hatch. So as you may be able to see, some tadpoles don't have legs yet, some tadpoles do, to varying degrees of development, but one tadpole has outpaced the rest and has also gotten its front legs. This means I need to set up a terrarium, as it will need to leave the water very soon. Once a tadpole has its front legs, I normally leave it no more than a couple of days before it needs to be removed. As you can see, this one still has its tail, so it's got a little way to go yet, but I think I do want to get this out today. Okay, so this is the terrarium that we're going to be setting up. Now, this was brand new last year. If you saw last year's series, I did set it up last year. We're doing the same sort of thing as I did last year. Now, when I first set it up, I did make a bit of a mistake, which I will not be making this time. So last time I used some terrarium soil, which is fine to use, but I made the mistake of not making it wet enough, which meant a couple of the frogs dried out as they were put in there because it was just too dry. So we're definitely not going to make that mistake this time. So this time, as I corrected the mistake last time pretty quickly, but we used a cocoa fibre brick. So we're going to be using one of these today. You add a whole load of water to this. I think it says 3 to 4 litres of water with one of these. Mix it and leave it for half an hour to really soak in, and that gives a perfect substrate to use at the bottom of your terrarium. So terrarium soil I think is fine to use, but whatever you use at the bottom, you just got to be wet enough. Frogs obviously need very high humidity, very moist conditions, or they will dry out, and we do not want that to happen. So we'll be using one of these, and you might be able to see there are a few decorations, same as what I used last year, but we'll get into that a little bit later on. But the first thing to do is to get this mixed up and ready to use. I'm adding 4 litres of water. I want the cocoa fibre to be as moist as possible. Okay, so while we wait for the brick to soak up all that water, let's talk a little bit about the food you need to adapt for your new tadpole diet. So when tadpoles get their back legs, they become carnivorous. Now originally they're herbivores, so we've been feeding them things like spinach and cucumber, romaine lettuce, anything like that, any sort of leafy green stuff they will eat. Algae that grows in the tank naturally they will eat. But once they get the back legs, they become carnivorous and they start to need to eat some meaty, more protein-rich foods. Now you may have seen my short video I did last weekend explaining a little bit about what to do that, but don't worry, we'll go all over it now. So I generally use bloodworm. It's very simple. I get this from the pet shop that sells it for like treats for fish food, and it comes in frozen in these little ice cube things, and I just pop in one of these ice cubes each day into the tanks, and the tadpoles will absolutely love it. You can use other things. Brine shrimp is good. You can get a very similar kind of setup to this for brine shrimp, or you can just go to the supermarket and get yourself some frozen whitefish. Just boil it up a little bit and give them that. They love that as well. That's possibly a cheap option, a little bit more intensive because you have to actually sort of cook it first. And obviously make sure that it is plain fish, no sauces, no other ingredients, obviously. Just be careful about salt content and that sort of thing. Make sure it's kind of healthy. But this is a really quick and convenient, easy way of doing it. So let's just give them a cube just now.
I add 1 cube of frozen bloodworm to each tank, and it doesn't take long for the ice to melt and the tadpoles to close in on it in a feeding frenzy.
Right, so the cocoa brick has been soaking for quite some time now. Now it's time to dive in, give it a bit of a mix. So let's get messy. Okay, so all seems to be really nice and mixed up. It's moist. It should be perfect now for the frogs. So now we need to get it into the terrarium.
Let's add some decorations. I have some plastic vine leaves. Last year the frogs loved climbing on this. I also have a half log made of wood from a coffee tree. This is good for the frogs to hide under or climb on. Lastly, I add 2 small water dishes.
Okay, so now that the cocoa fibre is in at the bottom, the decorations are in, the water dishes are in, last thing I want to add is some of this sphagnum moss. This is really nice, it looks nice, it also helps to keep the humidity high, it holds the moisture really well, and there's just a nice bit of decoration and function as well. So let's get a bit of this in. So we're almost at the end of this video, but we've got one more very important thing to do. We need to try and catch the tadpole with its front legs. and put it in the terrarium. So let's get to it.
I give the terrarium a spray with water to get the conditions right for our first frog. And I've caught the froglet in the net and pop it into one of the water dishes. It will be able to leave anytime it wants to.
Well, there he is, our first frog of the season. Now you may be wondering, what do we do now? What do we feed these guys once they turn into frogs? Well, first of all, you don't need to worry too much at the start, because while they still have their tails, they stop eating. Their tails will slowly be reabsorbed into their bodies, and they'll use that as an energy source. Once the tail is gone, then you do need to start eating. So things like aphids are the perfect food. If you can't find aphids in your garden, something like flightless fruit flies would be good, or hatchling-sized banded crickets. But that's something we're going to be having to get into the next video. But for now, thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Goodbye.